Move. I've got a shooter tied to this room. I'm not here to ask permission.
You need to step back and lower your voice. This area is restricted.
Don't play games with me. He fits my description. I'm going in.
You're standing in an ICU. You have zero authority to question that patient.
Keep blocking me and I'll put cuffs on you too.
Think very carefully about your next move.
I don't care who you are.
You should.
It was 11:42 p.m. on a cold November Friday in Chicago, and the fluorescent lights of Chicago Metro Hospital flickered slightly, casting long shadows down the polished floors of the intensive care unit. Outside room 412, a tense silence filled the hallway, broken only by the distant beep of monitors and the quiet shuffle of a nurse making her rounds. Then the doors at the far end opened with a clang, and Officer Raymond Cole stepped in. His boots clicked with purpose against the linoleum, and in his mind, tonight was routine. A simple follow-up on a gang-related shooting that had occurred 3 weeks earlier. Raymond had spent 23 years in the Chicago Police Department. He believed in results above process. 9 citizen complaints and 3 civil suits over the last 5 years had done little to slow him down. He saw them as inconveniences, not warnings. Tonight, he thought, he would get answers quickly. A black male suspect in his late 20s, medium build, tattoos visible, that was enough. It matched his case notes, and he had the authority to pursue it, or so he thought. What Raymond did not know was that the patient he was about to confront was under federal protection. Behind the door of room 412 lay Kevin Torres, 29, a man who had been shot just hours earlier while walking out of a convenience store. Kevin wasn't a street-level thug in the sense Raymond imagined. He was a cooperating witness, pivotal to a long-running FBI investigation into a multi-state drug distribution network. His survival mattered, not just for the case, but for the law. And standing firmly between Raymond and Kevin was Special Agent Terrence Blake, a 38-year-old FBI agent who grew up on Chicago's South Side and knew every street corner, every trap, and every human vulnerability that gangs exploited. Terrence wasn't flashy, but he was precise, careful, and respected. His 15 years in organized crime investigations had taught him that a single misstep could ruin months of work, or a person's life. Raymond spotted Terrence immediately. The man was dressed casually, jeans and a button-down shirt, civilian in appearance, but the FBI badge clipped to his belt gleamed under the fluorescent lights. In Raymond's mind, appearances didn't matter. He had a suspect to question. He had authority, and no casual-looking man was going to block him. "Step aside," Raymond barked, voice echoing slightly down the narrow hallway. "I've got a John Doe and a BOLO. I don't need warrants." Terrence's response was calm, deliberate. "Lower your voice and leave this room. This patient is under federal protection." Raymond's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize authority in casual clothing, and he certainly didn't respect the quiet, firm tone of a black man who dared to confront him. "He matches my suspect," Raymond said. "I'm taking him now." Terrence shifted his stance slightly, making it clear he would not budge. "This is a hospital," he said. "You don't have jurisdiction here." The tension in the hallway thickened like smoke. Every security camera was rolling, every step, every word being recorded. Terrence knew it. Raymond didn't, or he ignored it, confident that his badge and experience outweighed procedure. "Keep blocking me," Raymond said, his tone rising. "You're coming downtown too." Terrence met his gaze, calm but unwavering. "You really want to do this on camera?" For a moment, Raymond hesitated, but pride and routine were stronger than reason. "I don't care who you think you are." "Then you should," Terrence replied, almost conversationally. "Because I'm federal. This patient is under protective custody. You need to leave. Now." Raymond's mind raced. He had faced resistance before, but never like this. He had never been challenged in front of cameras by someone he assumed was a civilian. He saw Kevin lying in the hospital bed, bandages across his shoulder and torso, tubes and wires, making the man's fragile body look smaller, weaker. He thought he had urgency on his side, but Terrence had clarity. Raymond stepped closer. Terrence remained firm. It was a standoff, a battle of professional authority that neither man wanted to escalate physically, but both were aware how close it was to crossing that line. Terrence, trained in defensive tactics, understood exactly how to maintain control without using unnecessary force. Raymond, accustomed to defiance being met with submission, misread the situation. Terrence held up his credentials. "I am Special Agent Terrence Blake. You are attempting to access a patient under federal protection. Any attempt to question or detain him without federal authorization constitutes interference with a federal investigation." Raymond, frustrated and angry, dug into his phone and pulled up an alert. "I've got a description from 3 weeks ago. This man fits it. I have authority." Terrence glanced at Kevin through the window and then back at Raymond. "The description matches hundreds of people in this city. That does not constitute probable cause to question or arrest someone in intensive care. You are interfering. Stop immediately." Raymond's temper flared. "You're obstructing my investigation," he shouted, hand reaching for his belt. Terrence's voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension. "You are attempting to detain a federal agent who is protecting a subject. Remove your hand from your weapon. This is your final warning." The hallway seemed to shrink. Nurses paused in the distance, unsure whether to intervene. Hospital security started moving toward the commotion. Raymond froze, realizing for the first time that he had underestimated Terrence and overestimated his own authority. The cameras captured everything: the aggression, the threats, the attempted physical contact. Terrence's backup agents, previously out of sight, stepped into position, flanking him. Raymond's hand stayed near his weapon but did not draw. Every second stretched into a lifetime. A phone rang softly in Terrence's pocket. He called the Chicago PD liaison, professional and measured. Within 15 minutes, Captain Gerald Martinez, a 28-year veteran with experience in federal coordination, arrived. He saw Raymond, pale and rigid, flanked by FBI agents and hospital security, and knew immediately the gravity of the situation. Gerald didn't speak immediately. He waited. He watched the security footage on a tablet. He watched the fear, the miscalculation, and the stubbornness of a seasoned officer now realizing he had crossed a line he couldn't undo. Raymond's face showed the first glimmers of understanding. His 23-year career, built on assumptions and shortcuts, had just collided with procedure, authority, and federal law, and he was losing the battle before it even began. Before we continue, I need to ask you, where are you watching from right now? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you haven't already, take a second to hit that subscribe button. What happens next changes everything, for Raymond, Terrence, and Kevin, and you do not want to miss it. The elevator doors closed with a dull hum, separating Captain Gerald Martinez and his officers from the chaos unfolding in the intensive care hallway. Raymond Cole's hands trembled slightly as he tried to process what had just happened. For 23 years, he had relied on experience, instinct, and the authority his badge conferred. Tonight, all of that authority had collided with something he had underestimated: federal law, procedure, and a man who refused to be intimidated. Terrence Blake watched Raymond carefully, his posture relaxed but alert. He didn't need to make a move. The law was on his side, and the cameras had captured everything. His primary concern remained Kevin Torres, lying in a hospital bed just steps away. One wrong word, one impulsive act, and the witness's cooperation and life could be compromised. Raymond's voice broke the silence. "I was just trying to do my job." "You endangered a federal investigation," Terrence replied calmly. "You grabbed me. You reached for your weapon. You had no authority to question this patient. You need to leave now, and you need to explain yourself to your supervisor." Raymond's eyes darted around, searching for a justification that Terrence wouldn't already have on camera. He knew his words would be meaningless against the recorded footage. I didn't know he was under federal protection, he stammered. Terrence didn't respond. The truth was that Raymond could have known. Every local officer working in Chicago, with even a passing knowledge of ongoing investigations, would understand that some patients are placed under federal protection for a reason. But Raymond's pride and assumptions had blinded him. Captain Gerald arrived at that moment, moving quickly into the hallway. He had spent nearly 3 decades working in law enforcement, coordinating with both local and federal agencies, and he immediately assessed the situation. Raymond, still defensive, attempted to explain himself. Gerald held up a hand. "Let's go over this carefully," Gerald said. "Do you have a warrant to question this patient?" "No," Raymond admitted reluctantly. "Have you coordinated with hospital administration or verified whether this patient is under federal protection?" Gerald asked. "No, but—" "Then you violated procedure," Gerald cut in sharply. "And you have potentially violated federal law by interfering with an ongoing investigation." Raymond's mouth opened, closed, and then opened again. He had no rebuttal. The security footage, every word, every movement, left him exposed. Even the earlier boast that his badge gave him the right to bypass protocol was meaningless against the evidence. Meanwhile, Terrence remained calm, observing the unfolding consequences. He knew that as an agent, his responsibility was not just to protect Kevin, but to document the incident thoroughly, which he had done. Every step, every warning to Raymond had been recorded. Every professional boundary had been maintained. Gerald addressed Raymond again, his voice firm. "Surrender your weapon. You are returning to the station immediately for review by Internal Affairs." Raymond hesitated. He thought he might argue, might explain, might salvage some semblance of dignity, but the cameras and the presence of multiple federal agents left him with no choice. He handed over his service weapon, hands shaking slightly. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless. The officers escorted him quietly to the elevator. Every step felt heavier than the last. He knew that what had just happened would not only end his immediate assignment, it could very well end his career. Raymond had made assumptions, acted impulsively, and ignored warnings, and now the consequences were becoming real. Back in room 412, Terrence checked on Kevin, who remained stable but sedated. He had coordinated with hospital security to ensure that no further interruptions would occur. His team reviewed surveillance feeds to make sure nothing had been missed. The importance of documentation in situations like this could not be overstated. Terrence's phone rang. It was the FBI field office liaison. "Everything under control?" the voice asked. "Yes," Terrence replied. "The local officer has been contained, and Kevin is secure. I've documented everything and notified the captain. I'll be submitting a detailed report immediately." By 6 a.m., the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division had begun a full investigation. They obtained every second of hospital security footage, reviewed officer reports, and started interviewing all involved parties. Hospital personnel confirmed Terrence's account. FBI agents corroborated every detail. Witnesses confirmed Raymond's aggressive behavior, his physical contact with Terrence, and the movement toward his weapon. Internal Affairs also reviewed Raymond's history. 9 citizen complaints alleging excessive force, 3 settled lawsuits, and a pattern of bypassing proper protocol to achieve rapid results. Until now, those warnings had been overlooked, dismissed, or minimally addressed. But combined with the hospital incident, it painted a clear picture of escalating professional misconduct. Over the next 3 weeks, investigators meticulously reviewed footage, statements, and timelines. Raymond attempted to justify his actions, citing his suspect description, urgency, and intent to protect the public. But every claim was undermined by the evidence. Probable cause did not exist. Consent had not been obtained. Exigent circumstances did not apply. He had physically confronted a federal agent. he had reached for his firearm. Terrence, meanwhile, remained professional. He cooperated fully with internal affairs, submitting reports, answering questions, and providing context. He emphasized that Keevan's life and the integrity of a federal investigation had been at stake. His tone was factual, precise, and devoid of emotion, an intentional contrast to Raymond's defensive, reactive stance. The disciplinary review board convened. Security footage played repeatedly. Raymond's attempts at explanation were juxtaposed against Terrence's warnings, calm authority, and documentation. Board members noted the stark difference in approach and professionalism. Multiple violations were identified, ranging from policy breaches to potential federal interference. The decision was clear. Raymond's union representative argued that he acted under stress and that his intent was to protect the public. They claimed he had not been aware of federal jurisdiction. But the evidence was unambiguous. The attempt to arrest a federal agent in a hospital hallway had been recorded, and Raymond had ignored repeated warnings. Termination was recommended. Appeals were considered, but ultimately denied. The National Decertification Index was notified, effectively preventing Raymond from serving as a law enforcement officer anywhere in the country. His pension benefits were reduced, and his career ended, not because of a single mistake, but because years of unchecked behavior had culminated in a moment of professional failure. Meanwhile, Keevan Torres began recovery and formally entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. His cooperation provided crucial testimony, leading to multiple convictions of the drug distribution network's key members. Terrence Blake's careful, professional handling ensured not only the safety of the witness, but the success of the investigation. The hospital incident became a case study. FBI recruits studied the footage to understand jurisdiction, authority, and escalation management. Chicago PD officers were required to review it in annual training modules, focusing on interagency coordination and protocol adherence. Lessons were clear. Assumptions destroy careers, and ignoring federal authority can have immediate, irreversible consequences. Terrence reflected quietly on the events. Authority has limits, he knew. A badge alone does not guarantee the right to bypass procedure or escalate conflicts. Professionalism, documentation, and understanding the law's boundaries are the true tools of effective law enforcement. And for Raymond Cole, those lessons came too late. Before moving on, think for a moment. Have you ever seen someone in authority overstep, assuming power without understanding limits? Imagine the consequences if cameras hadn't been rolling that night. The city woke the next morning to the subtle hum of routine, oblivious to the chaos that had erupted hours earlier in a hospital hallway. But for Raymond Cole, the reverberations of that night would last a lifetime. By 8:30 a.m., news of the incident had reached the Chicago Police Department's internal offices. His name circulated quietly at first among supervisors, but the gravity of the security footage made anonymity impossible. Internal Affairs had reviewed the video multiple times, and the consensus was unanimous. Raymond had crossed every line. Officers and administrative personnel watched in disbelief as a 23-year veteran, a man many considered seasoned and competent, had failed to follow protocol at every turn. The aggressive gestures, the repeated warnings from Terrence Blake, the attempt to detain a federal agent, it all played out in crystal clarity. Captain Gerald Martinez scheduled a formal meeting with Raymond. He entered the office, his uniform crisp but his demeanor subdued. This was not a meeting about ordinary misconduct. This was the meeting where the consequences of years of unaddressed behavioral patterns would converge. Raymond, seated across from Gerald, tried to compose himself. But the weight of reality pressed down on him. Raymond, Gerald began, voice calm but firm, we've reviewed the hospital footage. You attempted to interfere with a federal investigation. You physically grabbed a federal agent and reached toward your weapon while being recorded. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? Raymond swallowed hard. Captain, I was acting on a suspect description. I thought it was my duty to follow through. Gerald shook his head. Duty does not override law, policy, or procedure. What you did endangered a protected witness, escalated the situation unnecessarily, and violated multiple department policies. Your career is on the line. Raymond's mind raced. 23 years of service, thousands of investigations, dozens of arrests, all hanging in the balance because of minutes in a hallway. He tried to protest further, citing stress, urgency, and the need to protect the public. Gerald interrupted every justification with the same undeniable fact: footage. Every attempt to rationalize was contradicted by the security cameras. By the afternoon, the recommendation was final. Termination. Raymond's union representative attempted a last-ditch appeal, arguing procedural ambiguity and lack of intent. The board watched the footage again, scrutinized every moment, and reaffirmed the decision. The outcome was devastating but unavoidable. News of the termination traveled quickly through police channels. Colleagues who had once respected him now whispered about his misjudgment. Former partners avoided eye contact. Raymond tried to rationalize the outcome in private, replaying events in his mind, attempting to find a scenario where he could claim he had acted correctly. But the cameras told the story better than his memory ever could. Meanwhile, Terrence Blake returned to the work that had initially brought him to the hospital. Kevin Torres, now stabilized, was prepped for further debriefing and eventual placement into the Witness Protection Program. Terrence coordinated with prosecutors, ensuring that Kevin's testimony and cooperation were documented thoroughly and legally. Every precaution mattered. This case had been the result of 14 months of meticulous investigation, and any misstep could undo it. Federal investigators began reviewing all available information on the Chicago distribution network. Kevin's cooperation unlocked doors that had remained closed for years. Names of mid-level operators, routes for narcotics distribution, and evidence of money laundering through local businesses. Within weeks, several raids were planned across Chicago and neighboring states. The FBI had a roadmap now, thanks in part to the incident that had unfolded in the hospital. Back in the city's federal court system, Kevin was carefully prepared to testify. Terrence and his team spent hours explaining legal procedures, reviewing evidence, and making sure every detail aligned with the federal investigation. Kevin's cooperation was voluntary but critical, and Terrence's careful oversight ensured his safety and credibility. Raymond Cole's termination made waves in police reform circles. Internal affairs officials publicly emphasized the importance of interagency coordination, proper procedure, and adherence to federal jurisdiction. The department revised training protocols, requiring all officers to verify federal involvement and hospital authorization before attempting to question or detain patients. The early warning system for officers with repeated complaints was strengthened, aiming to prevent incidents like Raymond's from recurring. Despite the turmoil, Terrence's reputation remained intact. Among colleagues, he was recognized for his professionalism, restraint, and quick thinking under pressure. The incident in room 412 became a case study at the FBI Academy, illustrating the importance of jurisdictional awareness, procedural adherence, and controlled escalation. Agents in training were shown the footage repeatedly, highlighting the contrast between Terrence's calm, methodical approach and Raymond's impulsive actions. Even as the training modules were developed, Terrence focused on the investigation itself. The success of the operation depended on more than the protection of one witness. It relied on months of evidence collection, financial tracking, and surveillance. With Kevin's cooperation secured, federal prosecutors moved forward with indictments against the distribution network. The strategy involved coordinated raids across multiple jurisdictions, ensuring that no suspects had the opportunity to flee or destroy evidence. Terrence knew that the stakes were enormous. Any leak or misstep could jeopardize the case, undoing years of investigative work. He continued to monitor the situation closely, liaising with state and local authorities, ensuring that each step aligned with federal law and policy. Every action was calculated, every decision documented. There was no room for error. Raymond, meanwhile, faced the reality of life outside law enforcement. His pension was reduced, legal bills mounted, and he struggled to find meaningful employment. Eventually, he secured a position as a security officer at a commercial facility outside the city, far removed from the responsibilities and authority he once wielded. The transition was humbling, a stark contrast to the power he had taken for granted in his police career. The ripple effects of the hospital incident continued to be felt. Chicago PD officers who witnessed the video firsthand were reminded that authority had limits, and that assumptions based on appearances could destroy a career. Federal agents across the country referenced the footage in training, emphasizing that calm professionalism, adherence to law, and proper documentation could prevent catastrophic outcomes. For Terrence, the focus remained on the work. The distribution network's collapse was only the beginning. The 14 individuals convicted as a result of Kevin's cooperation received substantial sentences, and federal authorities seized millions in assets. The disruption to the drug operations across Chicago had a measurable effect on crime rates in several neighborhoods. Yet, for Raymond, the lessons were personal and irreversible. 23 years of service ended in minutes because of pride, poor judgment, and repeated disregard for procedure. He had miscalculated, assumed authority he did not possess, and the evidence left no room for interpretation. And in that stark contrast between the two men, one rising, one falling, the story of authority, jurisdiction, and professionalism became clear. Terrence's calm, precise, and informed approach preserved not only a witness's life, but an entire federal investigation. Raymond's assumptions, impatience, and aggression ended a decades-long career and reshaped the training protocols of an entire police department. Before we continue, consider this. How often do people in positions of authority make decisions based on assumptions rather than facts? How many careers could be derailed in a moment of misplaced confidence? Months had passed since the chaotic night in the Chicago Metro Hospital, but the consequences of that hallway confrontation were still reverberating through both the Chicago Police Department and the FBI. Raymond Cole's termination had set a precedent, illustrating in the clearest terms that assumptions, unchecked aggression, and failure to respect jurisdiction could end even a decades-long career. He was now a shadow of the officer he once was, a man whose authority and reputation had been stripped away in a single incident, caught on camera for all to see. Raymond had tried to rebuild his life outside law enforcement, taking a security job at a commercial facility in a suburban town. The position paid the bills, but carried none of the authority or respect he had once wielded. Every day, he confronted the stark reality that a career built over 23 years could collapse in minutes because of poor judgment and ignored warnings. The union appeals, civil lawsuits, and pension disputes had all ended in failure. Each legal avenue had failed to undo what had been so thoroughly documented on hospital cameras. Back in Chicago, Terrence Blake returned to his work with a quiet focus. He had never sought public recognition for the hospital incident. His priority remained protecting witnesses, pursuing organized crime, and upholding the law. Kevin Torres had fully recovered and formally entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. His cooperation had been instrumental in bringing down a sprawling drug distribution network that had operated across multiple neighborhoods and states. 14 convictions had been secured, multiple leadership figures sentenced to substantial prison terms, and millions in criminal assets were seized. The operation represented one of the most successful federal prosecutions in recent Chicago history, all made possible because Terrence had acted decisively and professionally when it mattered most. The hospital incident itself became a cornerstone of law enforcement training. FBI recruits studied the footage of the standoff in room 412, analyzing every movement, every verbal exchange, and every decision made under pressure. The training emphasized key lessons. Jurisdiction matters, authority has limits, and professional conduct must always take precedence over ego. Officers were shown how a calm, methodical approach could resolve potentially violent encounters without escalating them, protecting both civilians and law enforcement personnel. Chicago PD officers were also required to review the incident. The department instituted strict new policies. No officer could attempt to question a patient in a hospital without coordination with hospital administration, verification of federal involvement, and proper authorization. The early warning system for officers with multiple complaints was enhanced, aiming to catch problematic patterns before they escalated into career-ending events. Raymond Cole's mistakes became the textbook example of what not to do. Terrence's actions in the hallway, measured, informed, and professional, stood in sharp contrast to Raymond's impulsive and aggressive behavior. Terrence had allowed the law to guide his actions, not emotion or ego. He had documented the confrontation meticulously, ensured the presence of witnesses, and relied on established protocols to maintain authority. His professionalism not only safeguarded Kevin Torres, but also preserved the integrity of a federal investigation that had cost over a year of planning and work. The FBI promoted Terrence to supervisory special agent 2 years later. He now led a team responsible for complex federal investigations across the Midwest, mentoring new agents and ensuring that the lessons from Room 412 were never forgotten. He had quietly achieved recognition for his composure, judgment, and understanding of the law, but he remained focused on his work rather than public acclaim. Raymond Cole, by contrast, became a cautionary tale. Every local officer who had witnessed the video or read the internal affairs report understood the risks of assumption, aggression, and procedural ignorance. He had been the recipient of repeated warnings over years, complaints of excessive force, lawsuits alleging misconduct, but the lack of early intervention had allowed those behaviors to culminate in a career-ending incident. His downfall underscored a broader lesson. Organizations that fail to address patterns of problematic behavior bear the cost when small errors escalate into crisis. The legal community also paid attention. Attorneys, both defense and prosecuting, noted the importance of procedure, jurisdiction, and documentation. The hospital footage had ensured accountability, provided irrefutable evidence of misconduct, and reinforced the principle that no officer, regardless of experience, could act above the law. It became a reference case in discussions of interagency cooperation, federal authority, and police accountability. Even the public indirectly felt the ripple effects. Crime networks had been disrupted, federal investigations strengthened, and trust in procedural law enforcement, at least in Chicago, gained a small boost. Citizens learned, indirectly, that authority comes with boundaries and that legal systems can, when properly executed, hold even long-serving professionals accountable. Terrence often reflected privately on that night. He thought about the countless officers who might assume authority without verifying their rights, the critical importance of remaining calm under pressure, and the need to protect the vulnerable in situations where lives and justice intersect. The hospital incident had been high stakes, yes, but it had also been instructive, a practical demonstration of how law, professionalism, and authority intersect in real-world scenarios. For Raymond Cole, the lessons were painful and permanent. A 23-year career, once filled with pride and authority, ended in a moment of misjudgment and overconfidence. He had assumed power without knowledge, ignored warnings, and escalated a situation that should have been handled with patience and procedure. He lost not only his position, but also his reputation, his pension benefits, and the respect of colleagues. The hospital incident became the defining moment of his professional life, and a warning to all who followed. Meanwhile, Terrence continued forward, focused on ensuring justice, protecting witnesses, and mentoring agents. The operations he led disrupted organized crime networks, safeguarded communities, and reinforced the principles of law enforcement. The contrast between his career and Raymond's highlighted a central truth. Authority carries responsibility. Understanding limits, following procedure, and maintaining professionalism can prevent disaster, protect lives, and secure justice. Room 412 and the hallway outside it became a symbol in law enforcement circles. A reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that assumptions are dangerous, and that true authority is earned through knowledge, discipline, and ethical practice. Terrence Blake's calm, informed, and decisive action preserved the integrity of the law, saved a life, and ultimately upheld the principles that police officers and federal agents are sworn to protect. And Raymond Cole? His story remains a stark lesson that careers, reputations, and livelihoods can unravel in minutes when assumptions, pride, and aggression replace prudence, procedure, and respect for authority. The lesson of that night is simple. Law enforcement is a privilege, not an entitlement. Authority has limits, and exceeding those limits has consequences. 10, 20, 30 years of experience cannot protect someone from the consequences of poor judgment in the face of clear federal authority. So, as you reflect on this story, remember, every action has consequences. Every assumption must be checked. Every badge comes with boundaries. Room 412 is proof that authority is not limitless, and professionalism, knowledge, and calm resolve will always prevail when the stakes are highest. What's one thing you learned from this story that surprised you? Leave your comment and share your thoughts, because lessons like these deserve to be remembered.